we're getting ready to get started. I'm here, I'm on the microphone, and I am about to let you guys in. So hang on one moment. Recording. All right, we are in session. Hello, hello. Welcome again to the 5 podcasting secrets you must know if you want to grow your show and make money. I am your host, Nikayla, host of the Side Hustle Pro podcast. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys so I can walk you through these slides. It's going to be really exciting and really informative. So first of all, let me just change over the screen. All right, here we are. So if you can see my slides, go ahead and give me a 1 in the chat. I'm going to go into present mode on Canva. By the way, shout out to Canva. I'm really loving their interface lately for showing you guys my slides. I used to be a Google Docs, Google Slides girl, but I'm on Canva. All right, so let me go over to the chat, make sure you guys can see my slides. 1, cool. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Kimberly. And we are going to go ahead now and get started. Let me make sure that I'm recording. Cool beans. All right. So the goal of today, you guys, is to let you know what you should really be focusing on when you're podcasting and dispel the myths that cause you to focus on the wrong things and essentially waste your time. You need to know what actually matters in podcasting, especially now in 2024, where it seems like everyone has a podcast and you're seeing all this stuff going on Instagram and TikTok and thinking you need to just keep up with the Joneses and do what everyone else is doing. No, let's focus. Let's hone in on what we should be doing. So again, that's my goal for today. So I want to give you guys a little backstory on who I am, though. In case you don't know, my name is Nikayla. Again, I host a podcast called Side Hustle Pro. I've been podcasting now for 7 years, and I just crossed my 400th episode. Woo woo! If you listen to the show, if you go over to the show right now, we just released our 400th episode. And it's really crazy that I'm in podcasting because I'm actually a very traditional girl. I was born in Jamaica, grew up in the Boogie Down Bronx. And if you're an immigrant, if you have immigrant parents, you know, growing up, it was all about the books, going to school, going to college, and just having a traditional career path. So it's really ironic that I am doing what I'm doing now, podcasting full time, right? So on the road to podcasting, I have done a lot of things right. Like I said, I was in my books, pursuing my education. I not only did I go to undergrad, but then I went to grad school. And you don't need to follow my path exactly to go anywhere, right? But it just goes to show you that you can be checking all the quote unquote good boxes and doing everything right, and things can still go wrong in life. So for me, that my reality check about the fact that things can still go wrong happened in May 2015. So this was me in May 2015. I look pretty happy, right? I look accomplished. I'm in my cap and gown. I look so successful. But, and I'm going to get to questions. You guys add whatever questions you have in the Q&A. I see some hands raised. So just go over to the Q&A and we'll get to those at the end. So I know I look pretty happy here, but inside what you can't see is I'm actually freaking out because at this moment, I'm rejected from my one internship that I did in MB school, and I didn't have a job. So I'm graduating with no job, no money. And at that time, I'm moving back to DC to live with my then boyfriend. And I savings because I spent my savings traveling during business school, right? Because I just thought I was going to get a job and just put it all back in savings. So it's feeling pretty disappointed in myself. Like, Nikayla, how did you let this happen? How can you be graduating with your graduate degree and don't have no money? So I just went back home and went back to, my boyfriend's house, who he's now my boyfriend. It worked out. I mean, he's not my husband. It worked out. But I said, all right, let me just get back to doing something. So I started blogging again. And at that point, again, around the 2015, 2016 timeframe, that's when building your brand really started becoming a thing, at least for me. So I knew I wanted to build my personal brand, but I wasn't sure what that all entailed. So I did what a lot of you guys are doing. I looked to people who were further down the path than me. I started following these online branding coaches, learning from them, buying their courses, programs, and I decided to relaunch my blog It was tacky. This was an example post. It was called Kayla K Speaks, play on my name. And at the time, I had content, but I didn't really have a purpose. The important thing though is that I got started, one foot in front of the other. So, oops, hold on. This is the one thing I don't like about the Canva. So I'll just use the arrow buttons, right? So I start following people. I take one foot in front of the other. And the important thing I learned at this point was instead of wallowing in I'm a failure, how could I do this? Instead, I said, you have to be willing to take the first step, even when you don't know where it will lead. Not only will you feel better to not be wallowing in self pity, but also you'll gain momentum. So I started just, moving forward. And I found that stepping outside of the comfort zone, that's where the magic happens. I start really feeling like, okay, we're getting somewhere, right? So I continue to blog. And then for me, with my blog, I realized there was a common thread. I loved sharing the stories of Black women side hustlers and entrepreneurs. I saw myself as a side hustler. I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I didn't know how to do that. So I just kept talking to people and figuring out how can I do this based on what they had done. And that is when the idea for my podcast, Side Hustle Pro, was born from the interviews I was doing on my blog. And what's funny is a year before launching Side Hustle Pro, I didn't even know what a podcast was. When people said the word podcast, it just sounded like jargon to me. I had no idea what that meant. A year later, look at me, right? I'm launching a podcast. And in the first 7 days after launching Side Hustle Pro, it's landing in the top charts. These are actual screenshots. On the left, that's a Side Hustle Pro podcast in the top 10 in marketing. And on the right, that's a Side Hustle Pro podcast in the top 50 in business at number 37, sitting pretty at number 37. And Side Hustle Pro was even featured by Apple Podcasts. This is Side Hustle Pro in the new and noteworthy section of Apple Podcasts with the episode I did with Curlbox founder Miley Teal. So immediately I'm getting traction because of the steps that I took to launch the podcast. And I was like, okay, this is well, let's keep this up. So I went hard on promotion that summer. Like these t-shirts I printed out myself. I hit up the conference scene. I even launched a shop to start testing out revenue streams, seeing if people would buy Side Hustle Pro merch. Your girl was on fire. All right. Because I realized that I was onto something. And if I took this seriously, I could quit my job. And that sounded pretty appealing to me at the time. Oh, and by the way, after about 6 months unemployed, I'd finally gotten a job at NPR, which in itself is serendipitous. We'll get to that later. But I knew by that point, after rejection, I knew I never wanted to depend on an employer ever again. So I hit that conference scene. I started studying podcast monetization. And I invested in myself. I invested in courses to learn things that I needed, skills that I needed to grow my revenue streams and be able to make money podcasting. For me, that looked like investing $1,197 in a 2-day event sponsorship intensive. So keyword event, you guys, sometimes when you can't find exactly what you need to find something in the general space. So I couldn't find anything for podcast sponsorships. So I said, okay, let me learn how to just pitch a sponsor. Let me pay for this. And I was just eager to learn anything at all about sponsorship. So I did that. And then 6 months after launching my podcast, I pitched my very first sponsor cold, meaning I didn't know anyone at the company. And from that pitch, I earned my first $4,000 podcast sponsorship contract. And then I kept going. I kept pitching sponsors. I kept monetizing. And so by December 2017, which was a year and a half after I launched Side Hustle Pro in June 2016. So by a year and a half later, I was able to quit my job to podcast full time. And this is the exact post that I posted on the Side Hustle Pro Facebook page to share the update. And you can go back and listen to that episode to hear all about how I quit my job to podcast. So that was my journey, you guys. A couple of key things that I want to highlight. So not only was Side Hustle Pro featured in major publications, and that helped as well. Well, that was 3 years after. This is 2019, so 3 years after launching. In 2022, Side Hustle Pro was also inducted into the Podcast Hall of Fame. So what a huge, huge honor. And I want to share today how I went from graduating with no job and no money to the Podcast Hall of Fame. So these are the 5 secrets that I'm talking about. Get ready to learn those 5 secrets, my 5 podcasting secrets that you must know if you want to grow your show and make money. So boom, secret number 1, let's get right to it. First of all, if you've been following me for a while, you may have heard this, but it cannot be stated enough. You have to make your podcast title memorable, and you have to make it understandable. People have to get what your show is about. Okay, beloved? People, you cannot take precious minutes having to explain your podcast topic. You've just lost someone. You've lost a potential listener if you need to do that. So most podcasters do this, though. They keep their podcast super broad so they don't put themselves in a box, or they just start a general conversation podcast with the homies, and they make their podcast title vague or a play on words or even a play on their name. How many of us have done this? Guilty as charged. So another thing that I'm seeing people do nowadays is launching in-person video podcasts before they even master audio podcasting. Here's what happens when you do these things. Number 1, you make it hard for people to find your show. If they don't understand what your title is, if your title doesn't have the keywords that they're searching for, missed opportunity. And number 2, you make it hard for people to even know what your show is about. Again, if they just have a blank face after seeing your title, not memorable, not understandable, missed opportunity again. And then you waste a lot of money on overhead costs if you're like paying for all this production stuff before you start making money from your show because you haven't mastered this basic thing that you need to do. So here's what you should do instead. Make your podcast title memorable and understandable. And let me give you some examples. First of all, I'm going to start with myself because I was the key person who was guilty of this mistake. You guys saw saw that I started with my blog and I called it Kayla K Speaks because it's a play on my name, Nikayla K Speaks. Thought it was so cute. What does that mean? Do y'all know? I don't even know. Looking back, I don't even know what that means. To top it off, I didn't even know what I wanted to talk about. I was writing about any and everything because I really wanted to use the blog to get a job. And I wanted employers to think, oh, she's such a great marketer. She's dissecting things going on in the business world. It was a mess. But once I really honed in on, hey, you know what? I like talking to entrepreneurs, specifically side hustlers, people who are building their business on the side. I updated my blog and eventually launched my podcast. And now this is my latest episode. Very clear what we're going to get to in this episode, right? We're going to talk about how this phenomenal stylist started at a corporate position at Gap Inc. and is now a celebrity stylist. Excuse me. Very clear, right? You know what's going on. And you know what's going on from the title too. At least you know it's about side hustles. And that's what you need. You don't need it to be perfectly like sum up a sentence in one title, but you need to get people who are searching for that keyword side hustle or whatever your keyword is. Now, I want to share with you Erica's story. So Erica is one of my Podcast Moguls students. When she joined Podcast Moguls, she actually had a podcast already. It was called, what you see here on the left, the Erica M. McAfee podcast. It's a podcast about grief and pregnancy loss and helping mothers navigate this space. Very important topic, very important work that she's doing, right? But again, it was called Erica M. McAfee. No one's searching for her name, right? They're searching for the topics related to the content. So she wasn't seeing the downloads she wanted because people were not finding her. And she couldn't figure out how to get more visibility for her podcast. So because the title of her podcast was Erica M. McAfee, once she went through the Podcast Moguls lessons, she rebranded with a more targeted title, Sisters in Loss, and more targeted, vibrant artwork. And here's what happened. All right. Her downloads tripled just from her first 8 weeks within Podcast Moguls. So this is the type of transformation that I want all of you guys to make. So let me know in the chat how many of you guys, rate yourself from 1 to 10, if you have a podcast, are making sure that your title is memorable and understandable. Rate yourself from 1 to 10. I want to see how memorable and understandable is your podcast topic. Okay, Cynthia with the 9, 10. Oh, okay, you guys. All right, we're going to see. Okay, Sherry's being honest, 6. All right. You guys are being very generous. 8. Okay. Thank you for being honest, you guys. Vanessa, Venus, and Chef. You know what? Congrats. Congrats to you guys if you're doing a great job. So let's go ahead and move into secret number 2 then. So secret number 2 is you need to clearly define your audience. So most podcasters do this. They try to target everyone. Example, all women, all men, all millennials, all Gen Z, all moms, right? Here's what happens when you do these things. You make it hard for people to know your show is for them. So is it for all moms, or is it for all moms with neurodiverse kids? Is it for all moms, or is it for moms who are entrepreneurs or working moms? You see what I mean? You confuse people by talking about a different thing each week. That's also confusing. And then you waste a lot of time spinning in circles to figure things out. So here's what you should do instead. Clearly define your audience. And by the way, your audience does not need to be defined by race or gender, but it needs to be clear who you're talking to. So let me share Tolu's story to give you an example. So Tolu joined Podcast Moguls with no podcast. She just had a lot of ideas, but no podcast. Once she went through the Podcast Moguls lessons on refining your topic, she decided to launch a podcast about UI design. UI stands for user interface. She works in that world, is really fascinated by it, but she wanted to hear stories from more people who look like her because it's a really interesting and unique space to work in, and there's not enough people of color. So she decided to do that work and be the solution. So she launched a podcast. She called it the UI Narrative Podcast. She was very clear about her target audience. Here on the left, you can see her artwork as well as her description for the show. You can see she's very, very specific about asking, have you ever wondered this, right? That might be the show for you if you've wondered that. And then she says, UI Narrative shares the stories of Black or people of color, interface designers and researchers, and their contribution towards creating user-centered experiences. All of this, her ideal target listener is just eating all this up because it's for them, right? And here's what happened when she was very clear about her target audience. Within months of launching, Google came calling to sponsor her show. This is an independent podcaster, small podcaster, right? She didn't have hundreds of thousands of downloads yet at this point. And Google came calling. Why? Because the partnerships team was looking for people who were talking to Tolu's audience. And she made it very clear that, hey, I'm talking to these people. So Google said, hey, we need to get in front of them. Let's sponsor this show. You see how that works? You make it clear. You have a clearly defined audience. You can get paid for that clearly defined audience. Now, let's get right into secret number 3 as well. So secret number 3 is you need to craft captivating social media content to grow your audience. A lot of people get confused around social media content. So you know how you clearly define your audience? Once you've clearly defined your audience, you can really captivate them on social media. So a lot of people think that you need all these followers on Instagram to grow your podcast. And no, it's not that. Most people also think your Instagram feed needs to be perfectly color coordinated with all these filtered photos and the perfect sequence like Beyonce's page. No, it's not that either. But here's what happens when you think that. You don't even try to create content, right? How many of you guys get analysis paralysis? Put paralysis in the chat if you sometimes just find yourself just overthinking creating content. If you do that, you miss out on opportunities to share with your audience or make money. And then your audience and your opportunities are going to remain stagnant. So here's what you should do instead to go from hobby to hustle with your podcast and to make sure that you are really growing the right listeners. You need to craft captivating social media content to grow that podcast audience. And I'm going to get right into what that means right now. So I want you to meet podcast mogul Shanitria of the Blunt Blowing Mama podcast. First of all, let's clap it up for that name, Blunt Blowing Mama. Yeah, it has the alliteration going. It's very clear who it's for, right? And the artwork is just so cool. So whether if you're not in this audience, cool, you'll keep scrolling. But if you are in this audience, you have found your girl, right? So that's number one. And then number two is she used what I teach inside of Podcast Moguls, the OMG formula to blow up her podcast audience using social media, specifically Instagram. So we get into the actual formula, and that's not important right now. Like you get the framework inside, but what's really important is the fact that she created captivating content. So here's what happened as a result of her growing her audience, though. She talks about this herself. She said that Side Hustle Pro is an amazing podcast coach. As someone who's a podcast mogul, she says, I can truly say she helped me get Blunt Blowing Mama podcast off the ground and grow BBM's IG page. Can you believe when Shanitria came into the program, she had 3,000 followers. And by the way, this is a screenshot that she shared on her IG story. And I asked, okay, do I have a permission to share this in my class? And she was like, sure. Because she, without me asking, when I was promoting my next class, she posted this in her IG story. And she talked about how when she joined, she had 3,000. And then she grew it organically to over 21,000 people. And she has exceeded that number. Now she's at over 100,000, right? And because of Podcast Moguls, she was able to find her tribe. And she even, reached out to me when she wanted to start the revenue stream, having a clothing line for her podcast. So she talks about she really knows her stuff. And if you want to really build a successful podcast, then her Podcast Moguls program is worth the investment. And that's awesome. I'm so glad that she shares that with you guys. But what I really want you to see is the kind of content she created and the impact. So not only did she learn the OMG formula to grow those Instagram followers, but then she kept going, right? And she discovered that people love her how she authentically shows up, presents information on top of her reels. And for her reels, and by the way, I didn't teach her this specific thing, but I love that once you know how to grow your page and once you do the obsessive audit that I teach you inside of the OMG formula, then it's up to you to develop the content that works for you. And so for her, the content that works for her page is sharing information in reel format, aka Instagram Reels video format, and she puts it on top of just her ordinary everyday activity that she's doing. She'll shoot what's called B-roll, just background video rolling as she walks on the beach, walks down the street, sits at a table contemplatively, eats something, drinks some wine, and then puts text on top of that. You can go over to @BluntBlowingMama on IG if you want to see exactly what I mean. But just by doing that, she is really connected with her people in a captivating way. So it's not enough to just say, hey, new episode. Really get down to what works for my person. So for the Side Hustle Pro page, Reels don't perform as well as it does on the Blunt Blowing Mama page. But we both know what works for our audience because we have gone out there and we've done the O in OMG, which is obsessively audit. And again, I break all of that down for you. We don't have time for it today to get into that whole framework, but I teach you how to audit and discover what is going to work best on your page. So that's how you create captivating content. And then that's how you grow your show. You bring people into your world, you share things, and you say, I explain more in this episode. Listen to the full episode. You make sure those links are in your bio, and you go from there. And nowadays, you don't even need a link tree yet. Linktree is a third-party site that allows you to have all these different links. Nowadays, even on Instagram, you can put multiple links within your bio, your business bio. So it's just a ripe opportunity to grow that audience. So Shanitria, Blunt Blowing Mama, has amplified her reach to an engaged community of over 112 100,000 people who now know about her podcast, listen to her podcast, and pay her for workshops and her Patreon. Like, how awesome is that? All by creating engaging content. And by the way, she bulk creates. So she doesn't wake up every day and create content. She puts that camera on, records herself doing stuff, and then one day sits down, empties her brain of the thoughts that she has that she wants to share with her audience and creates them all at once and schedules it out. And I teach you, by the way, how to do that as well. And I teach you some of my favorite apps to use to schedule things out. So we're not going to be on that content wheel. Okay. So don't worry and think, oh, I don't have time for all this content, Nikayla. So never mind. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. If I can do it with my 2 kids, you can do it too. All right. So let's go into secret number 4. If you have a podcast, you need to have a mission. You need a mission. So most podcasters do this. They start a podcast for fun, just for fun. Podcasting is fun. It's cool. It's fun to, get up and talk to different people, especially if you're doing interviews or just talking to your friends and talking about pop culture. It is fun. But if you're here, I suspect that you want something more. You're not just doing this for fun. You're not just interested in this for fun. You're interested in this because of the change you want to see in your life. So here's what happens when you just do it for fun and you don't challenge yourself to take it more seriously. Number one, you don't have a higher purpose that pushes you to keep going when it's slow at first, when you're not making money at first. You need that pull, like, no, I need to do this because I want to be of service. And if you have that, then you don't miss out on opportunities to be of service. Your podcast exists for a reason. It's serving someone, it's helping someone. Even if it's a lighthearted topic, that's helping someone, that's uplifting someone. And then if it's a business or a health topic, that's informationally helping someone. So here's what you should do instead of just doing it for fun or not taking it seriously because you're scared to put yourself out there, right? Really challenge yourself to commit and say, no, I believe in myself. I'm not just going to shrug this off as this is just a little thing I do for fun because I'm scared to take it seriously and get my feelings hurt or get let down. No. Connect your podcast to your deeper mission in life. Take it seriously. What do you really want out of life? Where do you see yourself going? What do you really care about? Right. So let me share Marina's story. So Marina is also a podcast mogul. Again, she is someone who did not have a podcast when she joined. So if you're thinking about joining Podcast Moguls or want to hear more about it, and you're like, is it for someone who has a podcast? Is it for someone who doesn't have a podcast? It's both. So Marina's example of someone who joined when she didn't have a podcast yet. She just really knew that she was intrigued by this format and she wanted to do something. So she had a deeper mission to teach young girls financial literacy. And after going through the lessons, coming to the coaching calls and Podcast Moguls, she was on it, by the way. From week 1, she was like, every call asking questions. How do I do this? How do I do that? And then she finally launched her podcast, Banking on Girls. And then just yesterday, that was our coaching call day yesterday, right? She came on and she shared that she just went to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women and spoke about her podcast in March 2024. Again, this is an indie podcaster, small podcaster, doesn't have hundreds of thousands of downloads, but she's growing. And she just spoke at the United Nations, y'all. If you have something on your heart and you are not taking it seriously, you are doing yourself a disservice. Like, this platform is life changing. So I implore you to take it seriously. Have it connected to a deeper mission. And finally, let's get into secret number 5 before we get to Q&A. So secret number 5 is you can make money from your podcast without sponsors. So all my podcasters in the building who are like, oh, I don't have enough downloads and all this other stuff. Let me share with you how you can make money starting today without having to be on the sponsor wheel of CRMs, average monthly downloads, and all that stuff. So a lot of podcasters think this though, right? They think you need to be worried only about the followers, only about the downloads to make money from podcasting. And that's not the case. Here's what happens when you think those things though. You miss out on clients or you miss out on customers who want to pay you. who believe and know that you have the knowledge they need. So you also miss out on opportunities to be of service because you think about the people who you have paid to teach you something, or you have paid for a product that you really needed, and imagine your life if they never launched that. Imagine what your life and how sad you would feel if those products didn't exist because that person didn't launch it. So here's what you should do instead: launch a podcast that serves your ideal client. Make it valuable and useful. Don't just launch a promotional, oh, talk about me, and what I do all day, but make it valuable and useful to this ideal client. And then launch a product or service for your ideal client. So here's Lori's story. She did exactly that. And she's someone who came into Podcast Moguls with a podcast already, but it was not targeted and it wasn't strategic. And if you're here and you're thinking about Podcast Moguls, I have a feeling you might be in the same boat, right? You started it, but it could really tighten up. So Lori joined Podcast Moguls to learn how to make money podcasting, because before Podcast Mogul, she was making $0 from podcasting, and she applied herself. She decided to really take the lesson seriously. And she was actually able to quit her full-time job as a tenured professor and move to Spain in 2021 because she is now a full-time podcaster. And I'm going to break down exactly what she did in a second, but I just want to speak to some of you who are really entrenched in your career path and your life story, right? You have defined yourself by whatever career role you have, and you're like, I can't pivot. Like, this is who I am. Where would I even begin? If you're thinking like that, just look at Lori. Lori is a tenured professor. If you know anything about tenure, you know that it is hard to get tenure, and when you have it, you don't want to lose it. That basically means you can't get fired. So to walk away from that and to redefine yourself, to break out of whatever box you've been in for all your life, that takes a lot of courage, but it is possible. So I don't deny that it takes a lot of courage, but I want you to know it's possible. And I want you to know that no matter what you've been doing, like, that is not you. You are not, you weren't born an accountant, you weren't born an attorney, you weren't born a doctor, you weren't born fashion buyer. Whatever you're doing, you can change. So Lori quit her full-time job as a tenured professor and moved to Spain in 2021. And it's because she launched a new podcast using her Moguls training that is pretty much a sales funnel to attract creative writing students and coaching. So one thing about Lori is not only was she a professor, but she is an author. She loves to write, right? It was her side hustle. It was never like her full-time thing. But she just wanted something new and different in life. So by launching this podcast, she is serving her ideal client, which are other writers, and she's creating something valuable and helpful for them, which is a podcast that tells them how to do the business of writing, how to make money as an author, recurring money. And she is teaching them all about ghostwriting, which is a really lucrative field that people have misconceptions about, and she's helping to demystify it. And all of this has become her sales funnel that allows her to live in Spain. And just look at her, just look at this hat. You can just see the difference in lifestyle she's able to afford now, and not afford as in monetary, but able to experience, because Spain is much cheaper than her life was in Philly, where she was a tenured professor. So that, my friends, is the power of podcasting. Those 5 secrets are the power of podcasting. And, I want to share also, like, something about my story that I've never shared this before. So I don't know if I'll share it ever again, but I feel like it's important to share, especially coming off of what I just told you about Lori. So I remember sitting at my desk and getting this dreaded, "Can you come to my office?" email from my boss. Before I sat down and saw that email, I saw her with papers in her hand, and she was kind of looking at me a little strange. Like, she looked flustered and upset. And I'm like, I just knew in the pit of my stomach, like, she heard about my podcast. When I started my job at NPR, I had a whole different boss. I put it on my resume, everything. Like, I was completely transparent. Then I'm sure you guys can relate to getting a new boss. And she didn't know me from a can of paint, and I didn't have time to explain my background to her. So I didn't have time to tell her about my side hustle because I always believed in being transparent. So she found out from some shady coworker who positioned it like it's something like I was trying to hide or something bad. And I tell you, when I got that email, like everything stopped. You know how you're in your cube and you hear the workplace chatter, you hear the coffee machine. It was like it was just me, and everything was a blur, and it went quiet. So I go into her office, and she is disturbed. She's like, "So this is where you're spending your energy? This is this is really what you care about?" And she's like, "I don't even know if this is a conflict of interest. I have to check with Anthony." Anthony was our HR guy. And the whole time my stomach is just glitching, glitching, glitching. Cause I'm like, oh my God, I'm about to get fired. I can't get fired. I haven't went to paperwork. This was summer 2017, right? Ooh, child. So to say I was stressed is an understatement. Now, I wasn't fired that day. And I wasn't fired later in the week when we had the talk with the HR and the legal and all these people, because they saw that it wasn't a conflict of interest, and I had disclosed it before I was hired. But even though I wasn't fired, I knew I needed to make a decision. I knew that I couldn't keep going on like this, afraid that someone could just snatch my job from underneath me because they decided I didn't look committed enough, right? So it was at that moment that I decided I needed to bet on me. So I actually that is the moment when I started to really get serious about my FU fund. I started to really go hard with pitching sponsors and squirreling away that money, squirreling it away, saving, saving, saving. And so that is why in December 2017, a year and a half after starting my podcast, I was able to quit my job. So again, I learned that you have to be willing to take the first step, even when you don't know where it will lead. I'd never been an entrepreneur before. I was scared. I mean, but I knew that I just had to bet on myself. Like if I was doing this much as a side hustle, imagine what could happen when I did it full time. Like that was my approach. And so I learned again that stepping outside of your comfort zone is where the magic happens. I'm an introvert. I prefer social media networking to real life networking. I'm not someone who likes all the attention and, loves posting about my journey. The fact that I didn't get a job after my summer internship, I kept that story a secret for like a year. I was so ashamed, y'all. I'm almost about to cry right now thinking about it. Like I was so ashamed, you guys. And it's when I finally like stepped out of that comfort zone and stepped out of like just holding on to stuff that I was being ashamed of for no reason, that all this magic has happened. Like I now work for myself. I pay myself. I pay employees. I'm able to work from home and take care of my kids without having to ask a boss for time off to take my son or daughter to the doctor's office. What? It's worth it. Okay. It's worth it. Starting a podcast is single handedly, to me, the most effective way to have career freedom. The most effective way to have career freedom, right? Podcasting gave me freedom and flexibility. When I had a job, I had very few vacation days. Podcasting allowed me to quit my job, go on the honeymoon of my dreams finally. When we got married, I didn't have enough vacation days for the honeymoon. Year later, took the honeymoon finally. Here I am in Zanzibar living my best life, all because of podcasting. Me and my husband Moyo, we're both side hustlers. We're both juggling parenting, careers, and our many entrepreneurial passions. So flexibility is huge for us. Like he's doing drop off and pickups every day. We're juggling everything we need to do. And it's because of that flexibility podcasting gave me. When I had a job, I had very little to no family leave. My son was home for 2 years with me before he started at school. My daughter has been home for 8 months before she's going to start daycare. So it has been huge. The fact that I can record episodes out of this closet, get paid to podcast, and still work from home, which I choose and want to do. And I want to stay home with my kids. So again, today podcasting allows me to work from anywhere while getting paid to podcast. Here I was in Jamaica on my maternity shoot for my daughter who was born in 2023. So if you are serious about taking the next step and having career freedom through podcasting, I really invite you and encourage you to join Podcast Moguls. You've seen what it's done for others, not just myself. I'm going to drop this link in the chat, or if someone wants to, it's sidehustlepro.co/podcast moguls. I'm not using a fancy webinar tool or nothing like that, so I have to put it in myself. Let me see if I can actually just drop it if my paste is still. Yeah, okay, my paste is still. So go ahead and check out Podcast Moguls right now. I'm going to walk you through everything inside of the program. Okay. So number one, inside of my Podcast Moguls coaching program, I do personally teach my proven strategies to podcasters like yourself who want to have a hit podcast, grow an audience, and make money from their podcast. And it's for you if you want to launch your podcast, if you want to grow your podcast, if you want to monetize your podcast, it's for you. And of course, if you want to get direct coaching from me, like Tolu and Marina and Lori and Shanitria have gotten. And it's broken down into 3 parts. So part 1 is the course itself. That's on demand. It's an 8-module course. It has video lessons, tutorials, my templates, my swipe files, everything I've used. So my pitch letters to guests, my pitch letters to sponsors, everything I've used is in there. And you can jump into that as soon as you start. It's right there. You get your access. Part 2 is the community. We have a private community where you can ask questions and get answers in between our group coaching calls. I'm in there. I'm answering your questions. I'm responding to you. Okay. Every single day. I'm in there. All right. You work with me. You post your wins, you post your challenges, you get feedback. And then part 3 is the coaching. Again, I'm your coach personally. So we have monthly live coaching calls. If you can't make them, you just go ahead and send in your question. I answer it on video. You watch the replay. So you're still getting live coaching. And then you also are able to, again, ask in the community if that works better for you. So that is the breakdown. Here's the actual modules. You'll see we go over from refining your topic to positioning, to launching, to marketing, to growing your email list, to the basics of Facebook and Instagram advertising. And then we get into the monetization and the winning pitches that you can craft, in addition to launching your own moneymaker that's not sponsor dependent. So if you have any questions, make sure you're dropping them in the Q&A because I'm about to get into Q&A. So head over to sidehustlepro.co/podcast moguls. There is a deadline to join at the promotional price, and there is a fast action bonus to join today. So stay tuned for that. There is a fast action bonus that goes away within 24 hours. But if you join on this call, you are sure to get it. So I just want to share with you Shirley's story because she's one of my OG podcast moguls. She's the host of the She's Got Drive podcast. When she joined, she had 25,000 downloads total. And in the first 3 months that she worked with me, she had 46,000. So she almost doubled her downloads just within the first few months of working together. And then in case you're like, hey, where the fellas at? I want to introduce you to Fritz Charles. So he's the host of the Coin Gamma podcast. And he joined. Fritz is also a humble and, laid back guy like myself, not really looking to be the star of the show, center of attention, but he was really passionate. He had a mission of really helping people better understand cryptocurrency. And so he started this podcast, Coin Gamma. And would you know, just by starting a podcast that had a defined audience, he was flown out, to speak at over 5 conferences, even flown out internationally to speak. He didn't expect any of this. It all came because of the podcast and because of being targeted in his approach to his audience and marketing because of Podcast Moguls. So that is what is available to you inside of Podcast Moguls. And I want to break down even further what you are getting. So again, you're getting monthly live coaching sessions. You are getting, hold on one second, guys. So you're getting monthly live coaching sessions. You're getting annual community access. You're getting all of my pitch letters and media kits. And I'm showing you the value on the right because this is what it costs by itself. Like you guys know, I paid $11.97 just to learn things about pitching sponsors. And it wasn't even podcast specific. My pitch letters show you exactly what to send to a sponsor of podcasts. Plus, you're getting guest pitch templates by themselves, People sell these for $5.97 or more to really land and know what to say to like high powered guests to get them in the guest chair. I'm including those inside of the program. Plus, you get my Master the Gram program. So by itself, that's $297. That's my Instagram focus course where I flesh out even more how to grow on Instagram. And you also get the Goal Getter Action course, which is my productivity solution to help you do this as a side hustler, as I was when I launched. And by the way, anytime Podcast Moguls is updated, anytime Master the Gram or Goal Getter Action Plan is updated, you still have access to all of that. You get access for life. So the total value, if you haven't added that up, is $8,553. So of course, I'm not going to charge you that. I just want you to understand the value of this program. So the full price of this program is $19.97, but with the masterclass, you are able to join for $9.97, or there's also a payment plan of $2.97. So paying in full, you are able to save and pay less. And also you do get access to the fast action bonus. If you pay right now, you have a fast action bonus. So you get not only what's included, but you also get my pitch email that landed me my first $4,000 in sponsorship. You get my 5-day branded blitz that landed me in the top charts in week 1 of launching my podcast. And by itself, I sell that for $297. And you also get my pitch email to Apple that landed my podcast in the new and noteworthy section. Fun fact, Apple gets so many pitches, you really need to know how to work the system and get in front of them. So this is exactly what I did to actually get featured as an independent podcaster. And then finally, you also get my pitch email. So I pitched to land my first international speaking engagement in Barbados. I sent a cold email to the event organizer and I got flown out to speak in Barbados, free vacation included. That was pretty awesome. So I'm sharing with you. I know a lot of you want to get on stages, you want to get in front of people, you want to understand how you can just pitch people. I'm providing all of those as a fast action bonus. So go ahead and take action right now. Again, this is the full everything that you're getting. Where's the link, Brahona? It's right here, sidehustlepro.co/podcast moguls. Let me know if you have any issues and when you join so I can shout you out. Okay. Oh, hold on. It was going to the wrong thing. Here's the link right here, sidehustlepro.co/podcast moguls. So you guys go ahead and jump over to the link. Again, it's sidehustlepro.co/podcast moguls. So the options are to pay in full and you get monthly live coaching, annual community access, all of my sponsorship pitch letters and media kits, my guest pitch templates, plus Master the Gram, plus the Goal Getter Action Plan, and the fast action bonus. You also receive my $4,000 sponsorship pitch email. So you can start using that today at any size because I did not have that many downloads when I pitched this. But again, I just really played up the fact of who my audience was. You'll get the 5-day branding blitz as a fast action bonus. You'll get my pitch email for my Apple Podcast feature, and you'll also get my pitch email for my speaking engagement. So the thing I like to emphasize as well, you guys, is, podcast moguls, it's really not about like where you are in the process. It's not about have you started or do you have the right idea? Am I a good podcaster? Any of that. It's really targeted at people who are ready to take fast action and bet on themselves, who are ready to get feedback and implement that feedback. Because so many of us, we like to hedge and we want some kind of sign to know, is this going to work? Is this the right thing? And I've learned in life that the sign comes when I take action. The sign comes as I start taking action, things start falling into place. So if I had waited to say, oh, should I start a podcast or should I invest in learning about sponsorship, I probably still be working at NPR and not growing my podcast. But because I said I know that no matter what, when I launch this podcast, I'm going to take it seriously and I'm going to go hard and something will come from this. I don't know what, but something will come from this is how I like to approach things. And the results have always come. So I know that, deciding where to invest your coins is a very serious decision. And that's just how I go about making the decision. And I also think about, the would this be worth it if kind of equation. So to me, I think about, would it be worth it if I got the result that I wanted? So would it be worth it if you could surpass 100,000 downloads in a few months like Nia did? If you could surpass whatever download plateau you are right now. So Nia of the Dreams of Black Wall Street podcast, she started her podcast, and then it surpassed 100,000 downloads in just 4 months from following the teachings inside of Podcast Moguls, because Nia also joined with an entirely different podcast, right? Completely different topic, but by going through the Refine Your Topic and really understanding her mission, she decided to start this podcast. And then the popularity of her podcast prompted BBC News to reach out to her, interview her, and produce a 4-minute short video with her narrating the story of the Tulsa Race Massacres. So how cool is that? Right? And she said herself, I have to say, I really was not expecting my podcast to take off the way it did. I could never imagine my podcast would do that well. And really is because of what I've learned inside of Podcast Moguls. So again, Podcast Moguls is open. This is the URL. It's also in the chat, sidehustlepro.co/podcast moguls. We are accepting a new cohort, and the promotional price is currently live. That promotional price does go away, and the fast action bonuses go away after this call. So you have two options. Option one is keep trying to DIY your podcast with tips gathered from all over social media and YouTube. Option two, decide to make podcasting a priority and get my coaching to know exactly where to start and what steps to take. Those are the two options. So you have the pay in full option, which is the $997 promotional price, which includes the fast action bonus. You also have the 4 payment plan. You still get the fast action bonus if you buy right now on this call. And then you would just pay each month. You still get monthly life coaching, annual community access, all of my sponsorship pitch letters and media kits, my guest pitch templates, plus Master the Gram, plus the Goal Getter Action Plan. With the fast action bonus, you are able to get my sponsorship pitch email that landed me my first $4,000. You get the 5-day branding blitz, my pitch email for the Apple Podcast feature, and my pitch email for speaking engagement. Cheryl, I'm going to jump into Q&A soon, but your question just caught my eye. So let me go ahead and answer. So you said, what if you started and had 4 podcasts and about to start again, but stuck on the name a little? So not a novice, but want this to be my full-time purpose. So wondering, Cheryl, that's exactly what Podcast Moguls is for. It's to help you make sure you don't start any more podcasts. You start the right podcast for you. I help you to flesh out your name and your topic and who you want to serve. So to make sure that you're creating a podcast that allows them to know it's for them right away. So definitely now is the time, especially for you, Cheryl, to join Podcast Moguls, because we don't want to keep starting podcasts and having to abandon them because there's something not quite right? Either the targeting is off, the name is off, or you didn't really strategically think it through. So let's help you. Let's get there. I am so excited to work with people like you, Cheryl, and like anyone else, whether you've launched it already, are about to launch again, or launch ever. Like I said, Tolu joined with just an idea, immediately went into action. Sponsors by Google. Marina launched with just ideas, went into action, just spoke at the UN. Lori came in with a whole other podcast. It was called American Melting Pot, I believe. Super broad, vague, didn't attract anyone because no one knew what it was about. She relaunched to Read, Write, Create, and is now serving her ideal client of writers and teaching them, having writers retreat and living her best life in Spain. So if you're unable to start now, go ahead. I would encourage you to do the payment plan, because in 30 days, then you have 30 days to do the next payment. And additionally, you can get started with the next coaching call. So if that works for you, that is another option. All right. So we're about to get into Q&A. I know I jumped into questions, but let me just refresh you guys on everything you're getting inside of Podcast Moguls. Just like we're talking now, except we see each other on video. So during our monthly live coaching sessions, you technically have, oh, this is another question that comes up. How many live coaching sessions? So technically you get 4, but I never turn anyone away. If you want to keep coming to coaching calls, come on down is how I feel. However, I want you to take that action. So I am going to be on you to make sure you're taking action. Annual community access, all of my sponsorship pitch letters and media kits, my guest pitch templates, plus Master the Gram, plus the Goal Getter Action Plan. So ask yourself, what kind of podcaster do I want to be? What kind of person am I? Am I someone who wants to keep sitting on the sidelines, DIYing this, trying to figure it out? And there's nothing wrong with trying to figure it out yourself. But the issue is, especially nowadays, there are just so many people who are on YouTube and Instagram, and the problem is you don't see their results. They can tell you anything. You've seen my results. You've seen what I've done, not only for myself, but for other podcasters. And so that's why it's so important, if not for me, to learn from someone who has proven results and who's going to help you and directly address what you want to address with starting a podcast. So just ask yourself, where do you want to be a year from now? Where do you want to be a year from now? What do you want to be doing? And then make the right decision from there. So the deadline to join at this promotional price is next Friday, April 26, 2024. Head over to sidehustlepro.co/podcast moguls. Come on down. And now let us get into Q&A. All right. Okay. So let's get into it. So Cynthia said, I've been following your podcast for a few years. By the way, I'd love to collab. I launched my podcast, Start Living Sustainable, about a year ago. How do I better connect with my tribe of health conscious women 20 to 40 years old? So Cynthia, this is one of the things that I love to help people understand. When it comes to connecting with your target listener, you have to get more granular than that. You have to spend some time really talking to this person who you think is your ideal listener, getting further insights. And what usually happens when I task my students with doing this, whether through a survey or actually getting on the phone with people, is you uncover things you didn't realize. And also it helps you to target and hone in on what you should be covering on the podcast. So it starts with finding ways to connect with this person, real life representation of this person. Start with your inner circle. Who else do you know who might be interested in this content? Start with who's following the podcast social media pages. Start with growing a small email list and then reaching out and asking for some survey responses or for a quick 10-minute phone call, and then going from there. And by the way, I provide this full framework inside of Podcast Moguls. I provide the questions and everything you need to then develop your perfect listener profile. Staha says, is a separate Instagram page really necessary for your podcast? Yes, you should start a separate Instagram page. Imagine when you're on the Today Show and they say, all right, and where can people connect with you after this? Instead of saying, go to @Staha Brown, you say the name of your podcast and you keep it universal. So people only have one shot to remember and easily know how to spell your podcast. So go ahead and start that Instagram, even if it's less followers than your personal page, because you want to be able to direct people to your podcast with one uniform phrase. Cynthia Harvey Brown, do you do sales a la carte? No, I do not do sales a la carte. So you buy the full course program. And I promise you, sometimes you come in and you think, oh, I know this already. I don't need this. And those are the people who always end up going back to the start and rebranding, like Nia, who did Dreams of Black Wall Street, came in with one podcast, completely launched a new podcast. And some of you hear that and you're like, that's too much work. But would you rather less work and no money or opportunities, or a little bit work, a little more work than you were anticipating, and now the opportunities are raining in like they are for Lori? So you tell me which you would prefer. Silva says, I have 25 episodes. Whoop, whoop, congrats. And I've gotten some good feedback, but still not taken off exactly. How do I narrow down my audience? I think that might be one of the problems. Oh, okay. So that's similar to what we just talked about with Cynthia, where you're going to need to write down who you think your audience is, and then you're going to need to get on the phone or find a way to email and survey that person to uncover what that person really wants, what that listener really wants, and go from there. Oh, you're so welcome, Cynthia. And Cheryl says, I want to be where you are in 1 year, so let's do it. Let me know if I answered all of your questions, you guys. We are about to stop. I'm going to stop the share. We are about to finish up the webinar for today. So let me know if I missed any questions. Okay, I see a few more came in via Q&A. All right. Thanks for the whoop whoop. You're welcome. Anonymous attendee, can you speak about how niche your podcast should be? Can entertainment be too niche where you limit your potential audience and sponsors because everyone isn't in entertainment? Entertainment is pretty broad right now. So what do you mean by entertainment? So there are podcast categories. So for example, when you go on your podcast, your Apple Podcasts or Spotify app, you'll see things like business podcasts, health podcasts, educational podcasts. And obviously that's still very broad. So when it comes to your podcast, your title can help me understand a little bit more about what you need. Niche is something where it is all case by case. So I say you're rarely ever too niched. There's only a few examples. So I'll give a podcast mogul, for example. So Nasima, Financially Intentional. At first, she came in and she was overly trying to niche down to nurses who practice the FIRE approach to investing. And she realized, you know what, that's a little bit too specific. So she's now talking to people who practice FIRE, and she's targeting just helping nurses understand how to use this and leverage the great salary that they earn to be able to retire early. So FIRE stands for, being able to invest and retire early. So that is an example of overly niching, but most people don't do that. Most people just start so broad, like women interested in finances, and we know that there's just all types of women. And again, niching doesn't have to be by gender or race, but when you do your perfect listener calls, which I provide the framework for inside of Podcast Moguls, when you do those calls, you are able to really know who it is you're talking to, and it clears up so much of the confusion. Venus says, do you do your podcast from home? Yes, I do podcast from home. This is actually a closet that I podcast from. Anonymous attendee, regarding start time, when would first payment be due if I did an installment plan? So if you do an installment plan, you are charged the first payment today and then the next payment in 30 days. So subsequent to that, it's every 30 days. All right. And with that, you guys, we are going to wrap up. Thank you so very much for joining today. I am so grateful that you were here with me. Final question. Do you find video podcasts are more location than just audio? More lucrative? Oh, I think you were saying, no, I don't think video podcasts are more lucrative. Video podcasts have a lot more overhead. So you have to pay for studio time, set. Sometimes you might have to kind of offset the cost of your guests' travel. It depends, right? Sometimes people are not just going to say, all right, I'll travel there. So there are some overhead costs that come with an in-person video podcast, more equipment and things like that you have to consider. So even if you made, let's say, your first $4,000, but you spend that on everything that you need to do the video podcast, the video editing is more expensive, then you're taking home less, right? You're netting less, you're profiting less. So you have to keep all of that in mind, especially when you're first starting out and you have $0 from podcasting. A lot of people starting video podcasts already have another business or they're side hustling, right? And they're willing to invest a lot more upfront money into that. So keep that in mind. Sometimes when you see these video podcasts, it looks so sexy, but there's a cost to that. And so someone who has another business might have more discretionary funds to invest in a new business of this podcast than you might. Just really think about how you want to go about it financially. I always recommend starting with audio. I started with audio. I know nowadays it's so much temptation and sexiness around doing the video thing, but I teach you how to do it in a cost-effective way. So I use a virtual video recording platform to do my video interviews, and I'm able to still do snippets online and get that aspect of it to promote the episode without paying for studio time or having to limit who I can interview because they can't be in town in New York. All right, you guys. So thank you again. Thank you to everyone who has joined Podcast Moguls. I can't wait to work with you. And Cheryl, again, the first installment is due today, and then subsequent to that, every 30 days. You guys are so welcome. GP, say you appreciate my calm, patient demeanor. Woo, woo, woo. All right. So take care, everyone. Thank you again. Welcome all the new Podcast Mogul students. And I'll talk to you next coaching call.